you suspend all military aid to Israel immediately.
Wow.
That is the only thing that will stop Netanyahu and the Israeli state and its current course of action. You have to make it clear that we will not support this. And I think that would have happened almost under every president that I can think of since the end of the Second World War. At one point or another, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Carter, all of them have intervened at some point and said enough's enough. Even George Bush and W., his son, when he was in office, put a stop to things that the Israelis were prepared to do in Gaza back during the Bush administration. We simply said, wait a minute, we support Israel. We believe Israel has every right to exist, and we want to help the Israelis live in security and safety and be prosperous. But that doesn't include unconditional support for anything the Israelis want to do, either to the people living on their soil who are Arabs or to their neighbors. Yeah. There's a difference. And right now they have unconditional support from the United States to do whatever they want. And so you're looking at what people are calling in the United Nations and in the International Criminal Court genocide, the mass extermination of people in Israel that the Israelis want to get rid of. Very simple. They want to rid themselves of these Arabs, Muslims and Christian Arabs. They want them out. And they're not going to stop there. They're going to go into the West Bank, and they're going to go into southern Lebanon. And anybody who disagrees with them is immediately branded an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is absurd. Nobody that I know is interested in harming Jews. That doesn't mean that they support harming Arabs or anybody else.
How much has
the 21st century, isn't it? Isn't this 2024? Haven't we figured this out?
Yeah.
Douglas Macgregor's remarks call for immediate action and clarity regarding U.S. support for Israel. His argument is straightforward but radical in its implications. The only way to halt the current course of action by Israel, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is for the U.S. to suspend military aid. According to Macgregor, history shows that past U.S. presidents have intervened to stop Israel from escalating violence, particularly against Palestinians, but this crucial intervention is missing today. Let's break down Macgregor's statement and explore the historical precedents, the nature of U.S.-Israel relations, and the broader implications of America's unconditional support for Israel. Macgregor references several U.S. presidents who, at key moments, intervened to prevent Israel from overreaching in its military actions. From Eisenhower to George W. Bush, there have been times when American leaders, despite their support for Israel, made it clear that there were limits to what they would allow. One of the most notable examples of U.S. intervention in Israeli military affairs came during the Suez Crisis in 1956. Israel, along with Britain and France, invaded Egypt following President Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal. Eisenhower, however, was determined to prevent further conflict in the Middle East. He pressured Israel to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula, signaling that U.S. support for Israel did not mean unconditional backing for all military ventures. In 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, President Nixon played a more complex role, providing significant military aid to Israel but also engaging in diplomacy to bring about a ceasefire. Though he supported Israel, Nixon recognized the need for restraint to avoid further escalation with the Soviet Union, which was backing Egypt and Syria. As Macgregor pointed out, even George W. Bush, known for his strong pro-Israel stance, intervened during his presidency. In 2002, as violence flared in Gaza, Bush pushed Israel to exercise restraint, signaling that while the U.S. would support Israel's security, there were limits to what Washington would tolerate in terms of military action against Palestinians. These historical examples highlight a consistent theme. U.S. presidents, despite their commitment to Israel's security, have recognized the need to step in and prevent Israel from taking actions that could destabilize the region further. Macgregor argues that this historical pattern of intervention has disappeared in recent years. The U.S. today, under successive administrations, has provided what he describes as unconditional support to Israel. This shift, according to him, is particularly dangerous because it allows Netanyahu's government to pursue policies that, in his words, amount to genocide against Palestinians. But what does unconditional support really mean, and how has it come to define U.S.-Israel relations in recent years? The U.S. provides Israel with approximately $3.8 billion in military aid each year, the vast majority of which is used to purchase American-made weapons. This aid package is part of a 10-year memorandum of understanding signed under the Obama administration. While the U.S. has long provided aid to Israel, Macgregor's point is that this aid now comes with fewer conditions attached. In the past, U.S. leaders would leverage aid as a means of influencing Israeli policy. Today, that leverage is rarely, if ever, used. The U.S. also consistently shields Israel from international criticism, particularly in the United Nations. Washington has used its veto power in the UN Security Council dozens of times to block resolutions condemning Israeli actions in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. This diplomatic protection further emboldens Israel, as it knows that it can act with impunity on the global stage without fear of serious consequences. One of the most controversial aspects of Macgregor's comments is his claim that Israel's actions amount to genocide. He points to the mass extermination of Arabs, including both Muslims and Christians, as a deliberate strategy by Netanyahu's government to rid Israel of its Arab population. This, according to Macgregor, is not limited to Gaza but extends to the West Bank and potentially southern Lebanon as well. The term genocide is, of course, a loaded one, and it carries specific legal definitions under international law. Genocide involves acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Macgregor's assertion is that Israel's actions in Gaza and its broader policies toward Palestinians fit this definition. This claim is echoed by some international bodies and human rights organizations. For instance, the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, ICC, have raised concerns about Israel's treatment of Palestinians, particularly during military operations in Gaza, where the civilian death toll is often high. However, labeling these actions as genocide remains a matter of fierce debate. What Macgregor is pointing out is that the lack of U.S. intervention allows these policies to continue unchecked. Without the threat of losing U.S. support, Israel has little reason to change its course of action. Macgregor also warns that Netanyahu's ambitions are not limited to Gaza. He suggests that Israel will eventually expand its military operations into the West Bank and southern Lebanon. This expansionist agenda, according to Macgregor, is part of a broader plan to permanently alter the demographic and political landscape of the region. In the West Bank, Israel's settlement expansion has long been a source of tension. The Israeli government continues to approve new settlements in areas that are internationally recognized as occupied Palestinian territory. These settlements, which are home to hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens, make the possibility of a two-state solution increasingly remote. In southern Lebanon, Israel has had a contentious history with Hezbollah, a militant group backed by Iran. Any Israeli incursion into Lebanon would likely provoke a fierce response from Hezbollah, potentially sparking a wider regional conflict. Yet, as Macgregor suggests, Netanyahu's government may be willing to take that risk, knowing that it has U.S. backing. One of the most striking points in Macgregor's speech is his criticism of how dissent against Israeli policies is often framed as anti-Semitism. He argues that this tactic is used to silence critics and stifle meaningful debate about Israel's actions. It's important to separate criticism of the Israeli government from anti-Semitism, which is the hatred of Jewish people. Criticizing the policies of a government, whether it's Israel, the United States, or any other country, should not be equated with hatred toward an entire group of people. Yet, as Macgregor points out, those who criticize Israel's treatment of Palestinians are often labeled as anti-Semites, a charge that shuts down conversation and discourages meaningful discussion about the issues at hand. Macgregor emphasizes that nobody he knows wants to harm Jews, but that doesn't mean they support the harm of Arabs or other groups. The idea here is that opposing violence and oppression should not be controversial. It should be a shared value, regardless of the religious or ethnic groups involved. Douglas Macgregor's speech is a call to action, urging the U.S. to reconsider its unconditional support for Israel. He argues that suspending military aid is the only way to force Netanyahu's government to change course, and he warns of the dangers of allowing Israel to continue its current policies unchecked. The stakes, according to Macgregor, are not just limited to Gaza, they extend to the West Bank, Lebanon, and the broader Middle East. At the heart of his argument is the belief that the U.S. has a moral responsibility to intervene, as it has done in the past, to prevent further escalation and violence. Whether or not one agrees with Macgregor's use of terms like genocide, his broader point remains. The U.S. must take a stand or risk being complicit in actions that could have devastating consequences for the region and beyond. You suspend all military aid to Israel immediately. That is the only thing that will stop Netanyahu and the Israeli state in its current course of action. You have to make it clear that we will not support this. And I think that would have happened almost under every president I can think of since the end of the Second World War. At one point or another, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Carter, all of them have intervened at some point and said, enough is enough. Even George Bush and W., his son, when he was in office, put a stop to things that the Israelis were prepared to do in Gaza back during the Bush administration. We simply said, wait a minute, we support Israel. We believe Israel has every right to exist, and we want to help the Israelis live in security and safety and be prosperous. But that doesn't include unconditional support for anything Israelis want to do, either to the people living on their soil who are Arabs or to their neighbors. There's a difference. And right now, they have unconditional support from the United States to do whatever they want. And so, you're looking at what people are calling in the United Nations and in the International Criminal Court, genocide. The mass extermination of people in Israel that the Israelis want to get rid of. Very simple. They want to rid themselves of these Arabs, Muslims, and Christian Arabs. They want them out, and they are not going to stop there. They're going to go into the West Bank, and they're going to go into southern Lebanon. And anybody who disagrees with them is immediately branded an anti-Semite, which of course is absurd. Nobody that I know is interested in harming Jews. That doesn't mean that they support harming Arabs or anybody else. It's the 21st century, isn't it? Isn't this 2024? Haven't we figured this out? Thanks for watching.